My repentances were very real, very earnest, and after each tragedy they happened every night for a long time. But as a rule, they could not stand the daylight. They faded out and shredded away and disappeared in the glad splendor of the sun. They were the creatures of fear and darkness, and they could not live out of their own place. The day gave me cheer and peace, and at night I repented again. In all my boyhood life, I am not sure that I ever tried to lead a better life in the daytime, or wanted to. In my age, I should never think of wishing to do such a thing. But in my age, as in my youth, night brings me many a deep remorse. I realize that from the cradle up I have been like the rest of the race, never quite sane in the night. When Injun Joe died? But never mind, in another chapter I have already described what a raging hell of repentance I passed through then. I believe that for months I was as pure as the driven snow. After dark. It was back in those far distant days, 1848 or 9, that Jim Wolfe came to us. He was from Shelbyville, a hamlet 30 or 40 miles back in the country, and he brought all his native sweetnesses and gentlenesses and simplicities with him. He was approaching 17, a grave and slender lad, trustful, honest, a creature to love and cling to, and he was incredibly bashful. It is to this kind that untoward things happen. My sister gave a candy pull on a winter's night. I was too young to be of the company, and Jim was too diffident. I was sent up to bed early, and Jim followed of his own motion. His room was in the new part of the house, and his window looked out on the roof of the 50 annex. That roof was 6 inches deep in snow, and the snow had an ice crust upon it which was as slick as glass. Out of the comb of the roof projected a short chimney, a common resort for sentimental cats on moonlight nights, and this was a moonlight night. Down at the eaves, below the chimney, a canopy of dead vines spread away to some posts, making a cozy shelter. And after an hour or two, the rollicking crowd of young ladies and gentlemen grouped themselves in its shade, with their saucers of liquid and piping hot candy disposed about them on the frozen ground to cool. There was joyous chaffing and joking and laughter, peal upon peal of it. About this time, a couple of old disreputable tomcats got up on the chimney and started a heated argument about something. Also about this time, I gave up trying to get to sleep and went visiting to Jim's room. He was awake and fuming about the cats and their intolerable yowling. I asked him, mockingly, why he didn't climb out and drive them away. He was nettled and said over, boldly, that for 2 cents he would. It was a rash remark and was probably repented of before it was fairly out of his mouth. But it was too late, he was committed. I knew him, and I knew he would rather break his neck than back down if I egged him on judiciously. Oh, of course you would, who's doubting it? It galled him, and he burst out with sharp irritation. Maybe you doubt it. Oh no, I shouldn't think of such a thing. You are always doing wonderful things with your mouth. He was in a passion now. He snatched on his yarn socks and began to raise the window, saying in a voice unsteady with anger. You think I dasn't? You do. Think what you blame, please. I don't care what you think. I'll show you. The window made him rage. It wouldn't stay up, I said. Never mind, I'll hold it. Indeed, I would have done anything to help. I was only a boy and was already in a radiant heaven of anticipation. He climbed carefully out, clung to the windowsill until his feet were safely placed, then began to pick his perilous way on all fours along the glassy comb, a foot and a hand on each side of it. I believe I enjoy it now as much as I did then, yet it is a good deal over 50 years ago. The frosty breeze flapped his short shirt about his lean legs. The crystal roof shone like polished marble in the intense glory of the moon. The unconscious cats sat erect upon the chimney, alertly watching each other, lashing their tails and pouring out their hollow grievances. And slowly and cautiously Jim crept on, flapping as he went, the gay and frolicsome young creatures under the vine canopy unaware, and outraging these solemnities with their misplaced laughter. Every time Jim slipped I had a hope, but always on he crept and disappointed it. At last he was within reaching distance. He paused, raised himself carefully up, measured his distance deliberately, then made a frantic grab at the nearest cat and missed. Of course he lost his balance. His heels flew up, he struck on his back, and like a rocket he darted down the roof feet first, crashed through the dead vines and landed in a sitting posture in 14 saucers of red-hot candy, in the midst of all that party, and dressed as he was. This lad who could not look a girl in the face with his clothes on. There was a wild scramble and a storm of shrieks, and Jim fled up the stairs, dripping broken crockery all the way. 1867. The incident was ended, but I was not done with it yet, though I supposed I was. 18 or 20 years later, I arrived in New York from California, and by that time I had failed in all my other undertakings and had stumbled into literature without intending it. This was early in 1867. I was offered a large sum to write something for the Sunday Mercury, and I answered with the tale of Jim Wolfe and the Cats. I also collected the money for it, $25. It seemed overpay, but I did not say anything about that, for I was not so scrupulous then as I am now. A year or two later, Jim Wolfe and the Cats appeared in a Tennessee paper in a new dress, as to spelling borrowed from Artemus Ward. The appropriator of the tale had a wide reputation in the West and was exceedingly popular. Deservedly so, I think. He wrote some of the breeziest and funniest things I have ever read, and did his work with distinguished ease and fluency. His name has passed out of my memory. A couple of years went by. Then the original story, my own version, cropped up again and went floating around in the spelling, and with my name to it. Soon first one paper and then another fell upon me rigorously for stealing Jim Wolfe and the Cats from the Tennessee Man. I got a merciless beating, but I did not mind it. It's all in the game. Besides, I had learned, a good while before that it is not wise to keep the fire going under a slander unless you can get some large advantage out of keeping it alive. Few slanders can stand the wear of silence. 1873, 1900. But I was not done with Jim and the Cats yet. In 1873, I was lecturing in London, in the Queen's Concert Rooms, Hanover Square, and was living at the Langham Hotel, Portland Place. I had no domestic household, and no official household except George Dolby, lecture agent, and Charles Warren Stoddard, the California poet, now 1900 professor of English literature in the Roman Catholic University, Washington. Ostensibly, Stoddard was my private secretary. In reality, he was merely my comrade. I hired him in order to have his company. As secretary, there was nothing for him to do except to scrapbook the daily reports of the great trial of the Tichborne claimant for perjury. But he made a sufficient job out of that, for the reports filled 6 columns a day, and he usually postponed the scrapbooking until Sunday. Then he haw columns to cut out and paste in, a proper labor for Hercules. He did his work well, but if he had been older and feebler, it would have killed him once a week. Without doubt, he does his literary lectures well, but also without doubt, he prepares them 15 minutes before he is due on his platform, and thus gets into them a freshness and sparkle which they might lack if they underwent the staling process of overstudy. He was good company when he was awake. He was refined, sensitive, charming, gentle, generous, honest himself, and unsuspicious of other people's honesty, and I think he was the purest male I have known, in mind and speech. George Dolby was something of a contrast to him, but the two were very friendly and sociable together, nevertheless. Dolby was large and ruddy, full of life and strength and spirits, a tireless and energetic talker, and always overflowing with good nature and bursting with jollity. It was a choice and satisfactory menagerie, this pensive poet and this gladsome gorilla. An indelicate story was a sharp distress to Stoddard. Dolby told him 25 a day. Dolby always came home with us after the lecture and entertained Stoddard till midnight. Me too. After he left, I walked the floor and talked, and Stoddard went to sleep on the sofa. I hired him for company. Dolby had been agent for concerts and theaters and Charles Dickens and all sorts of shows and attractions for many years. He had known the human being in many aspects, and he didn't much believe in him. But the poet did. The waifs and estrays found a friend in Stoddard. Dolby tried to persuade him that he was dispensing his charities unworthily, but he was never able to succeed. One night, a young American got access to Stoddard at the concert rooms and told him a moving tale. He said he was living on the Surrey side, and for some strange reason his remittances had failed to arrive from home. He had no money, he was out of employment, and friendless. His girl wife and his new baby were actually suffering for food. For the love of heaven, could he lend him a sovereign until his remittances should resume? Stoddard was deeply touched and gave him a sovereign on my account. Dolby scoffed, but Stoddard stood his ground. Each told me his story later in the evening, and I backed Stoddard's judgment. Dolby said we were women in disguise, and not a sane kind of women either. The next week the young man came again. His wife was ill with the pleurisy, the baby had the bots or something, I am not sure of the name of the disease. The doctor and the drugs had eaten up the money, the poor little family was starving. If Stoddard, in the kindness of his heart, could only spare him another sovereign, etc., etc. Stoddard was much moved and spared him a sovereign for me. Dolby was outraged. He spoke up and said to the customer, "Now, young man, you are going to the hotel with us, and state your case to the other member of the family. If you don't make him believe in you, I shan't honor this poet's drafts in your interest any longer, for I don't believe in you myself." The young man was quite willing. I found no fault in him. On the contrary, I believed in him at once, and was solicitous to heal the wounds inflicted by Dolby's too frank incredulity. Therefore, I did everything I could think of to cheer him up and entertain him, and make him feel at home and comfortable. I spun many yarns, among others the tale of Jim Wolfe and the cats. Learning that he had done something in a small way in literature, I offered to try to find a market for him in that line. His face lighted joyfully at that, and he said that if I could only sell a small manuscript to Tom Hood's annual for him, it would be the happiest event of his sad life, and he would hold me in grateful remembrance always. That was a most pleasant night for three of us, but Dolby was disgusted and sarcastic. Next week, the baby died. Meantime, I had spoken to Tom Hood and gained his sympathy. The young man had sent his manuscript to him, and the very day the child died, the money for the Ms. came 3 guineas. The young man came with a poor little strip of crepe around his arm and thanked me, and said that nothing could have been more timely than that money, and that his poor little wife was grateful beyond words for the service I had rendered. He wept, and in fact stuttered, and I wept with him, which was but natural. Also Dolby wept. At least he wiped his eyes and wrung out his handkerchief, and sobbed stertorously and made other exaggerated shows of grief. Stoddard and I were ashamed of Dolby, and tried to make the young man understand that he meant no harm, it was only his way. The young man said sadly that he was not minding it, his grief was too deep for other hurts, that he was only thinking of the funeral and the heavy expenses which. We cut that short and told him not to trouble about it, leave it all to us, send the bills to Mr. Dolby and. "Yes," said Dolby with a mock tremor in his voice, "send them to me and I will pay them. What are you going? You must not go alone in your worn and broken condition. Mr. Stoddard and I will go with you. Come, Stoddard, we will comfort the bereaved mamma and get a lock of the baby's hair." It was shocking, we were ashamed of him again and said so, but he was not disturbed, he said, "Oh, I know this kind, the woods are full of them. I'll make this offer. If he will show me his family, I will give him £20. Come." The young man said he would not remain to be insulted, and he said good night and took his hat. But Dolby said he would go with him, and stay by him until he found the family. Stoddard went along to soothe the young man and modify Dolby. They drove across the river and all over Southwark, but did not find the family. At last the young man confessed there wasn't any. The thing he sold to Tom Hood's annual was Jim and the Cats, and he did not put my name to it. So that small tale was sold 3 times. I am selling it again now. It is one of the best properties I have come across. Mark Twain. To be continued. North American Review. Number DCXV. May 17, 1907. Chapters from My Autobiography, Roman 18. By Mark Twain. Dictated December 21, 1906. I wish to insert here some pages of Sussie's biography of me, in which the biographer does not scatter, according to her custom, but sticks pretty steadily to a single subject until she has fought it to a finish. Feb. 27, 86. Last summer, while we were in Elmira, an article came out in the Christian Union, by name, "What Ought He to Have Done?" treating of the government of children, or rather giving an account of a father's battle with his little baby boy, by the mother of the child, and put in the form of a question as to whether the father disciplined the child correctly or not. Different people wrote their opinions of the father's behavior, and told what they thought he should have done. Mama had long known how to discipline children, for in fact, the bringing up of children had been one of her specialties for many years. She had a great many theories, but one of them was that if a child was big enough to be naughty, it was big enough to be whipped, and here we all agreed with her. I remember one morning when Doctor came up to the farm, he had a long discussion with Mama upon the following topic. Mama gave this as illustrative of one important rule for punishing a child. She said, "We will suppose the boy has thrown a handkerchief onto the floor. I tell him to pick it up, he refuses. I tell him again, he refuses. Then I say you must either pick up the handkerchief or have a whipping. My theory is never to make a child have a whipping and pick up the handkerchief too. I say, if you do not pick it up, I must punish you. If he doesn't, he gets the whipping, but I pick up the handkerchief. If he does, he gets no punishment. I tell him to do a thing. If he disobeys me, he is punished for so doing, but not forced to obey me afterwards." When Clara and I had been very naughty or were being very naughty, the nurse would go and call Mama, and she would appear suddenly and look at us. She had a way of looking at us when she was displeased as if she could see right through us, till we were ready to sink through the floor. From embarrassment and total absence of knowing what to say, this look was usually followed with Clara, or Sussy, what do you mean by this? Do you want to come to the bathroom with me? Then followed the climax for Clara, and I both knew only too well what going to the bathroom meant. But Mama's first and foremost object was to make the child understand that he is being punished for his sake, and because the mother so loves him that she cannot allow him to do wrong. Also, that it is as hard for her to punish him as for him to be punished, and even harder. Mama never allowed herself to punish us when she was angry with us. She never struck us because she was annoyed at us, and felt like striking us if we had been naughty and had annoyed her, so that she thought she felt, or would show the least bit of temper toward us while punishing us. She always postponed the punishment until she was no more chafed by our behavior. She never humored herself by striking or punishing us because, or while she was the least bit annoyed with us. Our very worst naughtinesses were punished by being taken to the bathroom and being whipped by the paper cutter. But after the whipping was over, Mama did not allow us to leave her until we were perfectly happy and perfectly understood why we had been whipped. I never remember having felt the least bit bitterly toward Mama for punishing me. I always felt I had deserved my punishment and was much happier for having received it. For after Mama had punished us and shown her displeasure, she showed no signs of further displeasure, but acted as if we had not displeased her in any way. Ordinary punishments answered very well for Sussy. She was a thinker and would reason out the purpose of them, apply the lesson, and achieve the reform required. But it was much less easy to devise punishments that would reform Clara. This was because she was a philosopher who was always turning her attention to finding something good and satisfactory and entertaining in everything that came her way. Consequently, it was sometimes pretty discouraging to the troubled mother to find that after all her pains and thought in inventing what she meant to be a severe and reform-compelling punishment, the child had entirely missed the severities through her native disposition to get interest and pleasure out of them as novelties. The mother, in her anxiety to find a penalty that would take sharp hold and do its work effectively, at last resorted, with a sore heart and with a reproachful conscience, to that punishment which the incorrigible criminal in the penitentiary dreads above all the other punitive miseries which the warden inflicts upon him for his good, solitary confinement in the dark chamber. The grieved and worried mother shut Clara up in a very small clothes closet and went away and left her there, for 15 minutes. It was all that the mother heart could endure. Then she came softly back and listened for the sobs, but there weren't any. There were muffled and inarticulate sounds, but they could not be construed into sobs. The mother waited half an hour longer. By that time, she was suffering so intensely, with sorrow and compassion for the little prisoner, that she was not able to wait any longer for the distressed sounds, which she had counted upon to inform her when there had been punishment enough, and the reform accomplished. She opened the closet to set the prisoner free and take her back into her loving favor and forgiveness, but the result was not the one expected. The captive had manufactured a fairy cavern out of the closet, and friendly fairies out of the clothes hanging from the hooks, and was having a most sinful and unrepentant good time, and requested permission to spend the rest of the day there. From Sussy's biography of me. But Mama's opinions and ideas upon the subject of bringing up children has always been more or less of a joke in our family, particularly since Papa's article in the Christian Union. And I am sure Clara and I have related the history of our old family paper cutter, our punishments and privations with rather more pride and triumph than any other sentiment, because of Mama's way of rearing us. When the article, What Ought He to Have Done, came out, Mama read it and was very much interested in it. And when Papa heard that she had read it, he went to work and secretly wrote his opinion of what the father ought to have done. He told Aunt Sussy, Clara, and I about it, but Mama was not to see it or hear anything about it till it came out. He gave it to Aunt Sussy to read, and after Clara and I had gone up to get ready for bed, he brought it up for us to read. He told what he thought the father ought to have done by telling what Mama would have done. The article was a beautiful tribute to Mama, and every word in it true. But still, in writing about Mama, he partly forgot that the article was going to be published, I think, and expressed himself more fully than he would do the second time he wrote it. I think the article has done, and will do a great deal of good, and I think it would have been perfect for the family and friends' enjoyment, but a little bit too private to have been published as it was. And Papa felt so too, because the very next day or a few days after, he went down to New York to see if he couldn't get it back before it was published, but it was too late, and he had to return without it. When the Christian Union reached the farm and Papa's article in it all ready and waiting to be read to Mama, Papa hadn't the courage to show it to her, for he knew she wouldn't like it at all at first. And he didn't, but he might have let it go and never let her see it. But finally he gave his consent to her seeing it, and told Clara and I we could take it to her, which we did, with tardiness, and we all stood around Mama while she read it, all wondering what she would say and think about it. She was too much surprised, and pleased privately, too, to say much at first, but as we all expected publicly. Or rather, when she remembered that this article was to be read by every one that took the Christian Union, she was rather shocked and a little displeased. Clara and I had great fun the night Papa gave it to us to read and then hide, so Mama couldn't see it, for just as we were in the midst of reading it, Mama appeared, Papa following anxiously and asked why we were not in bed. Then a scuffle ensued, for we told her it was a secret and tried to hide it. But she chased us wherever we went, till she thought it was time for us to go to bed, then she shouldered and left us to tuck it under Clara's mattress. A little while after the article was published, letters began to come in to Papa criticizing it. There were some very pleasant ones, but a few very disagreeable. One of these, the very worst, Mama got hold of and read, to Papa's great regret. It was full of the most disagreeable things, and so very annoying to Papa that he for a time felt he must do something to show the author of it his great displeasure at being so insulted. But he finally decided not to, because he felt the man had some cause for feeling annoyed at, for Papa had spoken of him. He was the baby's father, rather slightingly in his Christian Union article. After all this, Papa and Mama both wished I think they might never hear or be spoken to on the subject of the Christian Union article. And whenever any has spoken to me and told me how much they did enjoy my father's article in the Christian Union, I almost laughed in their faces when I remembered what a great variety of opinions had been expressed upon the subject of the Christian Union article of Papa's. The article was written in July or August, and just the other day Papa received quite a bright letter from a gentleman who has read the CU article and gave his opinion of it in these words. It is missing. She probably put the letter between the leaves of the biography, and it got lost out. She threw away the hostile letters, but tried to keep the pleasantest one for her book. Surely there has been no kindlier biographer than this one. Yet to a quite creditable degree, she is loyal to the responsibilities of her position as historian, not eulogist, and honorably gives me a quiet prod now and then. But how many she has withheld that I deserved. I could prize them now, there would be no acid in her words, and it is lost to me that she did not set them all down. Oh, Sussy, you sweet little biographer, you break my old heart with your gentle charities. I think a great deal of her work. Her canvases are on their easels, and her brush flies about in a carefree and random way, delivering a dash here, a dash there, and another yonder, and one might suppose that there would be no definite result. On the contrary, I think that an intelligent reader of her little book must find that by the time he has finished it, he has somehow accumulated a pretty clear and nicely shaded idea of the several members of this family, including Sussy herself, and that the random dashes on the canvases have developed into portraits. I feel that my own portrait, with some of the defects fined down and others left out, is here, and I am sure that any who knew the mother will recognize her without difficulty, and will say that the lines are drawn with a just judgment and a sure hand. Little creature though Sussy was, the penetration which was born in her finds its way to the surface more than once in these pages. Before Sussy began the biography, she let fall a remark now and then concerning my character, which showed that she had it under observation. In the record which we kept of the children's sayings, there is an instance of this. She was 12 years old at the time. We had established a rule that each member of the family must bring a fact to breakfast, a fact drawn from a book or from any other source. Any fact would answer. Sussy's first contribution was in substance as follows. Two great exiles and former opponents in war met in Ephesus, Scipio and Hannibal. Scipio asked Hannibal to name the greatest general the world had produced. Alexander, and he explained why. And the next greatest. Pyrrhus, and he explained why. But where do you place yourself then? If I had conquered you, I would place myself before the others. Sussy's grave comment was, that attracted me, it was just like Papa, he is so frank about his books. So frank in admiring them, she meant. Thursday, March 28, 1907. Some months ago, I commented upon a chapter of Sussy's biography, wherein she very elaborately discussed an article about the training and disciplining of children, which I had published in the Christian Union. This was 21 years ago, an article which was full of worshipful praises of Mrs. Clemens as a mother, in which little Clara and Sussy, and I had been hiding from this lovely and admirable mother because we knew she would disapprove of public and printed praises of herself. At the time that I was dictating these comments, several months ago, I was trying to call back to my memory some of the details of that article, but I was not able to do it. And I wished I had a copy of the article so that I could see what there was about it which gave it such large interest for Sussy. Yesterday afternoon, I elected to walk home from the luncheon at the St. Regis, which is in 56th Street and 5th Avenue, for it was a fine spring day, and I hadn't had a walk for a year or two, and felt the need of exercise. As I walked along down Fifth Avenue, the desire to see that Christian Union article came into my head again. I had just reached the corner of 42nd Street then, and there was the usual jam of wagons, carriages, and automobiles there. I stopped to let it thin out before trying to cross the street, but a stranger, who didn't require as much room as I do, came racing by and darted into a crack among the vehicles and made the crossing. But on his way past me, he thrust a couple of ancient newspaper clippings into my hand and said, "There, you don't know me, but I have saved them in my scrapbook for 20 years, and it occurred to me this morning that perhaps you would like to see them, so I was carrying them downtown to mail them. I not expecting to run across you in this accidental way, of course, but I will give them into your own hands now. Goodbye," and he disappeared among the wagons. Those scraps which he had put into my hand were ancient newspaper copies of that Christian Union article. It is a handsome instance of mental telegraphy. Or if it isn't that, it is a handsome case of coincidence. From the biography, March 14th, 86. Mr. Lawrence Barrett and Mr. and Mrs. Hutton were here a little while ago, and we had a very interesting visit from them. Papa said Mr. Barrett never had acted so well before when he had seen him, as he did the first night he was staying with us. And Mrs. said she never had seen an actor on the stage, whom she more wanted to speak with. Papa has been very much interested of late in the mind cure theory. And in fact, so have we all. A young lady in town has worked wonders by using the mind cure upon people. She is constantly busy now curing people's deceases in this way, and curing her own even, which to me seems the most remarkable of all. A little while past, Papa was delighted with the knowledge of what he thought the best way of curing a cold, which was by starving it. This starving did work beautifully, and freed him from a great many severe colds. Now he says it wasn't the starving that helped his colds, but the trust in the starving, the mind cure connected with the starving. I shouldn't wonder if we finally became firm believers in mind cure. The next time Papa has a cold, I haven't a doubt, he will send for Miss H, the young lady who is doctoring in the mind cure theory, to cure him of it. Mama was over at Mrs. George Warner's to lunch the other day, and Miss H was there too. Mama asked if anything as natural as nearsightedness could be cured. She said, oh yes, just as well as other diseases. When Mama came home, she took me into her room and told me that perhaps my nearsightedness could be cured by the mind cure, and that she was going to have me try the treatment anyway. There could be no harm in it, and there might be great good. If her plan succeeds, there certainly will be a great deal in mind cure, to my opinion, for I am very nearsighted and so is Mama, and I never expected there could be any more cure for it than for blindness. But now, I don't know but what there's a cure for that. It was a disappointment. Her nearsightedness remained with her to the end. She was born with it, no doubt, yet, strangely enough, she must have been 4 years old and possibly 5 before we knew of its existence. It is not easy to understand how that could have happened. I discovered the defect by accident. I was halfway up the hall stairs one day at home, and was leading her by the hand, when I glanced back through the open door of the dining room and saw what I thought she would recognize as a pretty picture. It was Stray Kit, the slender, the graceful, the sociable, the beautiful, the incomparable, the cat of cats, the tortoise shell, curled up as round as a wheel and sound asleep on the fire-red cover of the dining table, with a brilliant stream of sunlight falling across her. I exclaimed about it, but Sussy said she could see nothing there, neither cat nor tablecloth. The distance was so slight, not more than 20 feet perhaps, that if it had been any other child I should not have credited the statement. From the biography, March 14th, 86. Clara sprained her ankle, a little while ago, by running into a tree when coasting, and while she was unable to walk with it, she played solitaire with cards a great deal. While Clara was sick and Papa saw her play solitaire so much, he got very much interested in the game, and finally began to play it himself a little. Then Jean took it up, and at last Mama even played it occasionally. Jean's and Papa's love for it rapidly increased, and now Jean brings the cards every night to the table and Papa and Mama help her play, and before dinner is at an end, Papa has gotten a separate pack of cards and is playing alone, with great interest. Mama and Clara next are made subject to the contagious solitaire, and there are 4 solitairans at the table, while you hear nothing but fill up the place, etc. It is dreadful. After supper, Clara goes into the library and gets a little red mahogany table, and placing it under the gas fixture, seats herself and begins to play again. Then Papa follows with another table of the same description, and they play solitaire till bedtime. We have just had our prince and pauper pictures taken, 2 groups and some little single ones. The groups, the interview and Lady Jane Grey scene, were pretty good. The Lady Jane scene was perfect, just as pretty as it could be. The interview was not so good, and 2 of the little single pictures were very good indeed, but one was very bad. Yet on the whole, we think they were a success. Papa has done a great deal in his life, I think. That is good and very remarkable. But I think if he had had the advantages with which he could have developed the gifts which he has made no use of in writing his books, or in any other way for other people's pleasure and benefit outside of his own family and intimate friends, he could have done more than he has and a great deal more even. He is known to the public as a humorist, but he has much more in him that is earnest than that is humorous. He has a keen sense of the ludicrous, notices funny stories and incidents, knows how to tell them, to improve upon them, and does not forget them. He has been through a great many of the funny adventures related in Tom Sawyer and in Huckleberry Finn, himself, and he lived among just such boys, and in just such villages all the days of his early life. His Prince and Pauper is his most original and best production. It shows the most of any of his books what kind of pictures are in his mind, usually. Not that the pictures of England in the 16th century and the adventures of a little prince and pauper are the kind of things he mainly thinks about, but that that book and those pictures represent the train of thought and imagination he would be likely to be thinking of today, tomorrow, or next day, more nearly than those given in Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn. Papa can make exceedingly bright jokes, and he enjoys funny things, and when he is with people he jokes and laughs a great deal, but still he is more interested in earnest books and earnest subjects to talk upon than in humorous ones. When we are all alone at home, 9 times out of 10, he talks about some very earnest subjects, with an occasional joke thrown in, and he a good deal more often talks upon such subjects than upon the other kind. He is as much of a philosopher as anything, I think. I think he could have done a great deal in this direction if he had studied while young, for he seems to enjoy reasoning out things, no matter what. In a great many such directions, he has greater ability than in the gifts which have made him famous. Thus at 14 she had made up her mind about me, and in no timorous or uncertain terms had set down her reasons for her opinion. 15 years were to pass before any other critic, except Mr. Howells, I think, was to root her that daring opinion and print it. Right or wrong, it was a brave position for that little analyzer to take. She never withdrew it afterward, nor modified it. She has spoken of herself as lacking physical courage, and has evinced her admiration of Clara's. But she had moral courage, which is the rarest of human qualities, and she kept it functionable by exercising it. I think that in questions of morals and politics she was usually on my side, but when she was not, she had her reasons and maintained her ground. 2 years after she passed out of my life, I wrote a philosophy. Of the 3 persons who have seen the manuscript, only one understood it, and all 3 condemned it. If she could have read it, she also would have condemned it, possibly, probably, in fact, but she would have understood it. It would have had no difficulties for her on that score. Also, she would have found a tireless pleasure in analyzing and discussing its problems. Mark Twain. To be continued. North American Review. Number DCXVI. June 7, 1907. Chapters from My Autobiography, Roman 19. By Mark Twain. From Sussie's Biography of Me. March 23, 86. The other day was my birthday, and I had a little birthday party in the evening, and Papa acted some very funny charades with Mr. Gerhardt, Mr. Jesse Grant, who had come up from New York and was spending the evening with us, and Mr. Frank Warner. One of them was on his knees, Honey's sneeze. There were a good many other funny ones, all of which I don't remember. Mr. Grant was very pleasant, and began playing the charades in the most delightful way. Sussie's spelling has defeated me this time. I cannot make out what Honey's sneeze stands for. Impromptu charades were almost a nightly pastime of ours, from the children's earliest days. They played in them with me when they were only 5 or 6 years old. As they increased in years and practiced, their love for the sport almost amounted to a passion, and they acted their parts with a steadily increasing ability. At first they required much drilling. but later they were generally ready as soon as the parts were assigned, and they acted them according to their own devices. Their stage facility and absence of constraint and self-consciousness in The Prince and Pauper was a result of their charading practice. At 10 and 12, Sussy wrote plays, and she and Daisy Warner and Clara played them in the library or upstairs in the schoolroom, with only themselves and the servants for audience. They were of a tragic and tremendous sort, and were performed with great energy and earnestness. They were dramatized freely from English history, and in them Mary Queen of Scots and Elizabeth had few holidays. The clothes were borrowed from the mother's wardrobe, and the gowns were longer than necessary, but that was not regarded as a defect. In one of these plays Jean, 3 years old perhaps, was Sir Francis Bacon. She was not dressed for the part and did not have to say anything, but sat silent and decorous at a tiny table and was kept busy signing death warrants. It was a really important office, for few entered those plays and got out of them alive. March 26. Mama and Papa have been in New York for 2 or 3 days, and Miss Corey has been staying with us. They are coming home today at 2 o'clock. Papa has just begun to play chess, and he is very fond of it, so he has engaged to play with Mrs. Charles Warner every morning fro to 12. He came down to supper last night, full of this pleasant prospect, but evidently with something on his mind. Finally he said to Mama in an apologetical tone, "Sussy Warner and I have a plan." Well, Mama said, "What now, I wonder?" Papa said that Sussy Warner and he were going to name the chess after some of the old Bible heroes, and then play chess on Sunday. APRA 86. Mama and Papa, Clara and Daisy have gone to New York to see the Mikado. They are coming home tonight at 7:30. Last winter, when Mr. Cable was lecturing with Papa, he wrote this letter to him just before he came to visit us. Dear Uncle, that's one nice thing about me. I never bother anyone to offer me a good thing twice. You don't ask me to stay over Sunday, but then you don't ask me to leave Saturday night, and knowing the nobility of your nature as I do, thank you, I'll stay till Monday morning. Yours and the dear families. George W. Cable. December 22, 1906. It seems a prodigious while ago. 2 or 3 nights ago I dined at a friend's house with a score of other men, and at my side was Cable, actually almost an old man, really almost an old man, that once so young chap. 62 years old, frost on his head, 7 grandchildren in stock, and a brand new wife to re-begin life with. Dictated no, 1906. Ever since Papa and Mama were married, Papa has written his books and then taken them to Mama in manuscript, and she has expurgated them. Papa read Huckleberry Finn to us in manuscript just before it came out, and then he would leave parts of it with Mama to expurgate, while he went off up to the study to work. And sometimes Clara and I would be sitting with Mama while she was looking the manuscript over. And I remember so well, with what pangs of regret we used to see her turn down the leaves of the pages, which meant that some delightfully dreadful part must be scratched out. And I remember one part particularly, which was perfectly fascinating, it was dreadful, that Clara and I used to delight in, and oh, with what despair we saw Mama turn down the leaf on which it was written. We thought the book would be almost ruined without it. But we gradually came to feel as Mama did. It would be a pity to replace the vivacity and quaintness and felicity of Sussy's innocent free spelling with the dull and petrified uniformities of the spelling book. Nearly all the grimness it taken out of the expurgating of my books by the subtle mollification, accidentally infused into the word by Sussy's modification of the spelling of it. I remember the special case mentioned by Sussy, and can see the group yet, 2/3 of it pleading for the life of the culprit sentence that was so fascinatingly dreadful, and the other third of it patiently explaining why the court could not grant the prayer of the pleaders. But I do not remember what the condemned phrase was. It had much company, and they all went to the gallows. But it is possible that that specially dreadful one, which gave those little people so much delight, was cunningly devised and put into the book for just that function, and not with any hope or expectation that it would get by the expurgator alive. It is possible, for I had that custom. Sussy's quaint and effective spelling falls quite opportunely into today's atmosphere, which is heavy with the rumblings and grumblings and mutterings of the simplified spelling reform. Andrew Carnegie started this storm, a couple of years ago, by moving a simplifying of English orthography and establishing a fund for the prosecution and maintenance of the crusade. He began gently. He addressed a circular to some hundreds of his friends, asking them to simplify the spelling of a dozen of our badly spelt words. I think there were only words which end with the superfluous "a." He asked that these friends use the suggested spellings in their private correspondence. By this, one perceives that the beginning was sufficiently quiet and unaggressive. Next stage, a small committee was appointed, with Brander Matthews for managing director and spokesman. It issued a list of 300 words, of average silliness as to spelling, and proposed new and sane spellings for these words. The President of the United States, unsolicited, adopted these simplified 300 officially, and ordered that they be used in the official documents of the government. It was now remarked by all the educated and the thoughtful except the clergy that Sheol was to pay. This was most justly and comprehensively descriptive. The indignant British lion rose, with a roar that was heard across the Atlantic, and stood there on his little isle, gazing, red-eyed, out over the glooming seas, snow-flecked with driving spindrift and lathing his tail, a most scary spectacle to see. The lion was outraged because we, a nation of children, without any grown-up people among us, with no property in the language, but using it merely by courtesy of its owner the English nation, were trying to defile the sacredness of it by removing from it peculiarities which had been its ornament, and which had made it holy and beautiful for ages. In truth, there is a certain sardonic propriety in preserving our orthography, since ours is a mongrel language which started with a child's vocabulary of 300 words, and now consists of 225,000. The whole lot, with the exception of the original and legitimate 300, borrowed, stolen, smouched from every unwatched language under the sun, the spelling of each individual word of the lot locating the source of the theft, and preserving the memory of the revered crime. Why is it that I have intruded into this turmoil and manifested a desire to get our orthography purged of its asininities? Indeed, I do not know why I should manifest any interest in the matter, for at bottom, I disrespect our orthography most heartily, and as heartily disrespect everything that has been said by anybody in defense of it. Nothing professing to be a defense of our ludicrous spellings has had any basis, so far as my observation goes, except sentimentality. In these arguments, the term venerable is used instead of moldy, and hallowed instead of devilish. Whereas there is nothing properly venerable or antique about a language which is not yet 400 years old, and about a jumble of imbecile spellings which were grotesque in the beginning, and which grow more and more grotesque with the flight of the years. Dictated Monday, November 30, 1906. Jean and Papa were walking out past the barn the other day, when Jean saw some little newly born baby ducks. She exclaimed as she perceived them, "I don't see why God gives us so much ducks when Patrick kills them so." Sussy is mistaken as to the origin of the ducks. They were not a gift, I bought them. I am not finding fault with her, for that would be most unfair. She is remarkably accurate in her statements as a historian, as a rule, and it would not be just to make much of this small slip of hers. Besides, I think it was a quite natural slip, for by heredity and habit ours was a religious household, and it was a common thing with us whenever anybody did a handsome thing, to give the credit of it to Providence, without examining into the matter. This may be called automatic religion. In fact, that is what it is. It is so used to its work that it can do it without your help or even your privity. Out of all the facts and statistics that may be placed before it, it will always get the one result, since it has never been taught to seek any other. It is thus the unreflecting cause of much injustice. As we have seen, it betrayed Sussy into an injustice toward me. It had to be automatic, for she would have been far from doing me an injustice when in her right mind. It was a dear little biographer, and she meant me no harm, and I am not censuring her now, but am only desirous of correcting in advance an erroneous impression which her words would be sure to convey to a reader's mind. No elaboration of this matter is necessary. It is sufficient to say I provided the ducks. It was in Hartford. The greensward sloped downhill from the house to the sluggish little river that flowed through the grounds, and Patrick, who was fertile in good ideas, had early conceived the idea of having homemade ducks for our table. Every morning he drove them from the stable down to the river, and the children were always there to see and admire the waddling white procession. They were there again at sunset to see Patrick conduct the procession back to its lodgings in the stable. But this was not always a gay and happy holiday show, with joy in it for the witnesses. No, too frequently there was a tragedy connected with it, and then there were tears and pain for the children. There was a stranded log or two in the river, and on these certain families of snapping turtles used to congregate and drowse in the sun, and give thanks, in their dumb way, to Providence for benevolence extended to them. It was but another instance of misplaced credit. It was the young ducks that those pious reptiles were so thankful for, whereas they were my ducks. I bought the ducks. When a crop of young ducks, not yet quite old enough for the table but approaching that age, began to join the procession and paddle around in the sluggish water and give thanks. Not to me, for that privilege. The snapping turtles would suspend their songs of praise and slide off the logs and paddle along under the water and chew the feet of the young ducks. Presently, Patrick would notice that 2 or 3 of those little creatures were not moving about, but were apparently at anchor, and were not looking as thankful as they had been looking a short time before. He early found out what that sign meant. A submerged snapping turtle was taking his breakfast and silently singing his gratitude. Every day or two, Patrick would rescue and fetch up a little duck with incomplete legs to stand upon, nothing left of their extremities but gnawed and bleeding stumps. Then the children said pitying things and wept, and at dinner we finished the tragedy which the turtles had begun. Thus, as will be seen, out of season at least, it was really the turtles that gave us so much ducks, at my expense. Papa has written a new version of There is a Happy Land, it is. There is a boarding house, far, far away, where they have ham and eggs 3 times a day. Oh, don't those boarders yell when they hear the dinner bell. They give that landlord rats 3 times a day.